Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this formal meeting of the Executive Scrutiny Board here at Derby City Council on the 7th of April 2025. I'm Councillor Chris Poulter, member for Spondon Ward. I'm chairing the committee tonight. So I'm going to move straight to the agenda and ask if there's anybody sent apologies, please.
No apologies. I think there might be a full house, actually.
Have one written, have we? Yes, Councillor Orr.
Councillor Cecile Wright sent apologies.
Oh yes, I remember that. Yes, she did send Stephen an apology. Yes, thank you. No late items, I understand.
None received.
Declarations of interest from members on any item on the agenda, please. None. Item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March. I'll propose them. Can I have a second? Yes, Councillor Bolton, thank you. And move on then to item 5 and the forward plan. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Yes, Councillor Bolton.
Chair, can I try and be helpful regarding the forward plan?
Bearing in mind, try and be helpful. We know you.
Bearing in mind the recent meetings we've had regarding the issue. Reading through this document earlier, it isn't consistent. And I'll give you some examples. Page 4, the first item, Chief Executive, to acquire approximately 7.5 acres of industrial land in Chaddesden West Ward. Thank you for that. It has got the ward in. A lot of these documents haven't got the ward or the wards. And I think it would be useful if we could have a box saying which wards would be affected by any particular issue. But furthermore, who will be...
There's a bit more information there as well.
Precisely. Also, under the box, who will be consulted, if you go through the document, that isn't consistent either. Some of them just say the relevant cabinet member along with the relevant officer. There is no mention of ward councillors. And I think if we think back of the latest dilemma we had, there was an issue with that. And clearly, you know, to be helpful and to focus officers, if the ward or wards could be in this document and the councillors. Because if I go further on, there are some other examples, particularly, I think it's page 14, extension stroke renewal of public space protection orders. This is regarding antisocial behaviour. Who will be consulted? Residents, businesses, local police, police and crime commissioner, no mention of ward councillors. And I think, you know, we're the link between the community and residents. We're there to represent. And if we're not part of this document, then I think, you know, that's how hiccups can come across. So I really think this document needs to be consistent, needs to have the ward or wards identified, and always have the ward councillors, not just the cabinet member or the appropriate officer. I could go on with other examples, but I think you've got me gist. You know, it's just going to be practical and sensible for everybody, in my view, Chair, so I hope it can be supported. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kerr on the same subject.
Yes, Chair, on the same subject, because I think that if we are going to review the document, one of the things that we have an example of in this one, and I think we might have an example of in a future one, is withdrawn items. And often they have, as two of these are this time, they're identified as being not a key decision. Not a key decision. So I would have thought that if we actually had a box which said why this is a key decision, we might have fewer of these items going in and then being withdrawn. Because, for example, update on MCA funding for regeneration and transport, I don't know why an update would be a key decision. So I don't know why that is listed here. There might be something within that update which would explain why it's a key decision, but in its heading in itself, I don't think it is.
Yeah, that's a strange one, because it's a significant amount of money, obviously, and it affects, some of it affects bit large areas of the city.
Absolutely,
and the decision's
Chair.
already been taken at MCA, hasn't it, in effect? So,
But the point is, Chair, that if it's a significant amount of money, that's the reason why it would be a key decision, but only if a decision needs to be taken around that large amount of money. And if there were 2 or more wards affected, it would be a key decision, and that's why it would be listed there as to why it was a key decision.
so I take your point. Your point is if there is effectively a tick box in the presentation for the forward plan or the report for the forward plan, saying why is this a key decision or not, then at least it makes them consider whether or not it is a key decision and why. So I think we could certainly put that forward to 2 parts to that, really. Got that? Yeah?
Yes, I've noted those 2 suggestions and I'll pick those up outside of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Anything else on the forward plan? Councillor Mulhall, did you indicate you wanted to say something on the forward plan? No? Okay. Good. Moving on then, which brings us to item 6 on the Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. You've seen the report on that. Any comments, questions on that? Nope. And then we'll move to item 7, which is consideration of the Council Cabinet's agenda. And I think the first, for me, well, they'll obviously be considering any recommendations that we put tonight at item 7, but their item 8, they'll be considering the minute extract and the referral back to them of the call-in that we all attended and concluded should be referred back to them on Wednesday. Obviously, we had a lot of debate and a lot of discussion on the subject on the night, reached a firm conclusion. Is there anything that we need to add? Is everybody happy to let that minute go forward as is and see what they make of it on Wednesday? I think just, if anything, we should just reaffirm the commitment to that call-in procedure and await their early response and actions. Yeah. Good. So moving on then, item 9 is a minute extract from the Regen and Vibrancy Climate Change Scrutiny Board, in particular in relation to the marketplace. Councillor Holmes, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to just briefly introduce this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there was two recommendations. The first one is, as you say, the regeneration scheme, marketplace, and what's involved in that. And obviously the minutes are quite extensive, so obviously Cabinet can have a read of those and consider them. But we resolved as a board to ask for and be able to scrutinise details of consultation prior to its launch. So obviously at some point, hopefully soon, there'll be some public consultation, and we asked that we'd see that first to be able to positively engage with that as well in advance of it being launched. Then details of the business case, which is still being worked on by the council prior to its sign-off. That was the request. Again, to allow scrutiny, to allow positive engagement in the board. These recommendations all are very positive, that we want to actually help the council move forward with a scheme which is going to be the best it can be for the city for what will be many decades to come. And the third recommendation, again, all linked into that, was the emerging planning application, which is key in this because obviously there are conditions currently on the demolition of the assembly rooms which require a full business case and, well, contractual, so the business case is part of that. But it also requires a full planning application so that it has substance to be able to then meet those conditions. So we asked again to, as a board, to see those in advance prior to them being submitted to the planning authority, which is Derby City Council. So that was the regeneration scheme recommendations, and hopefully Cabinet will be positively welcoming those to be able to work with the board to move forward on what is probably the most important project that the council has on its books currently, Chair. The second
Sorry, Councillor,
Sorry, yeah.
just before we move off that one, I think it's because I was there and with yourselves, obviously, at that region. I think the overwhelming feeling there was to support and welcome any development on that site, but recognition, those recommendations sought to recognise the need to cover those important items, to be able to expedite any plan that goes on there. Because if they don't consult properly, if they don't decide the planning, and if they don't make the necessary arrangements in terms of the overall picture, then it's just going to drag it out, and that's not what anybody wants, is it? So those, I think the point was, those recommendations were designed to be helpful in terms of progressing any future plan that comes forward.
Absolutely. It has to be the right plan as well. Obviously, the council, we know, are very keen to move forward as soon as possible. But it's such an important part of the city and such an important scheme in terms of all the elements that encompass it, that you're exactly right. We want to positively engage with the council to get this right. And that's basically what the recommendations are, to work with us on that. The second one is regarding ward transport priorities. Now, the officers brought a more broader presentation to the board, but we'd asked specifically about the ability for councillors in wards to be able to put forward small-scale schemes, normally road safety, parking restrictions, those kind of nuts and bolts, low-hanging fruit, if you like, Chair. And you know yourself in Spondon and myself in Mickletover, we get many requests, and I'm sure you will agree, and probably every councillor in this chamber will agree, that we have now a long, long list of requests from residents, and also requests from the councillor cohort, as well as what we could actually deliver to improve various issues we have across the city. Now, that has not been possible to put forward in recent years. We used to be able to, via the board mechanism, to put forward those priorities, but that's not been possible for whatever reason. And we learnt that effectively council officers are overwhelmed with the amount of requests and schemes that have been requested. And we learnt that they come from many sources, but primarily the larger amount of requests are coming from the public, which is fine. But obviously we explained that we did have a process via the neighbourhood boards, which we felt really did deliver over a long period of time, sometimes very positive things, and we haven't got the ability to do that. So the various recommendations were to reconsider implementation of a similar scheme that we used to have, so that boards / councillors can actually put forward reasonable requests for small-scale transport improvements and similar, and that even the officers should consider scrapping, well, wiping the slate clean, if you like, Chair, in terms of starting again with the amount of requests that they have, which has overwhelmed the system effectively, so nothing is being delivered, and working very closely with councillors, who then obviously can work with residents to build up lists that we could deliver at a ward level. So a reset really is what we're asking. I think it's something which every councillor is very frustrated about, because currently in my ward, and I'm sure everybody else is having to do this, we get a group of residents or residents sort of asking for, say, double yellows on a junction to improve safety. We go in and have a look. We think that that's actually a sensible proposal. We add it to our list, but there's no ability for us to actually move that forward. And now 2 or 3, 4 years have gone by, and we haven't been able to deliver any of the things, which is an ever-growing list at a local level. So it was a recommendation to try and unblock that, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree with everything you say. We've all got, I'm sure in all of our wards, previous LTPs that have just never been met and are still on the back burner. And there is an acceptance from the traffic management team and highways officers that they're not able to deliver all these things, and the use of the word overwhelming is a bit of a struggle. But we know that neighbourhood funding, the small amount of neighbourhood funding that we get, can't cope with any significant LTP priority. If anything, you know, a new barrier at the end of a jitty probably will use 2/3 of the funding that we get for neighbourhood things by the time you've planned it and paid for it and whatever. So there is a need for a recognition, because we made the point, didn't we, Matt, at the meeting, that there seems to be, and I've made it to officers as well, and Nigel's in the room, we seem to have a bit of a hiatus, a bit of a dead spot at the moment where things are not being able to be delivered for a variety of reasons, and that's mainly because of the role transferring to the combined authority. But there needs to be an acknowledgement that the combined authority aren't going to look at where that extra bollard needs placing locally or whatever. They are strategically looking much deeper. So I think we're preaching to the converted. We're all in the same boat as councillors in this respect. So this recommendations on here go a little way just to identifying the extent of that problem. Nigel, you've listened to that. Is there anything you want to add very briefly in relation to that?
Thank you. I think some of it is covered in the report that we've got on the main agenda.
Yeah, and the various reports on the main agenda touch on extra funding, and it's not insignificant extra funding, and it's all capital funding that needs to be spent and planned and worked and delivered, and we're already in a position whereby the resources are probably inadequate to be able to deliver some of the things we want to do. Do you have concerns around that, or what's the plan to be able to deal with that?
I think we do have concerns around the resources and the resource availability to expand, if you like. The industry nationwide is struggling for capable people. So the adjustment period is probably one where we're going to end up with a mixed economy of going out to specialists for certain things and then trying to grow new recruits, because you know it's the middle range people with a 5 to 7 years experience that are not clearly available, and they're the people that we would want to mop up. And of course, within the region itself, all 4 authorities are trying to respond to the same impetus as well. So even the private sector market is struggling as much as the public sector market. So we do have concerns. So we are going to have to go through a reorientation period, changing governance. Again, a lot of this is covered in the main report. But yeah, you're right, there is a concern about resource availability.
Okay. Councillor Kerr?
Thank you, Chair. I picked up the link between this and that report as well, but it doesn't really, the other report doesn't really bring out the solution as strongly as I think that the recommendations from Scrutiny were hoping for. That there is talk there about the lack of resource and the need for strategic thinking, but we need to really bring those ward level priorities need to come into and put together in a form that will meet that regional strategic framework. And I don't think that the report later on really does that. And I think we need to put a recommendation into that report that strengthens that to support this recommendation from Exec Scrutiny. Because obviously Exec Scrutiny didn't have the benefit of that report that we've got tonight to bring it to. Chair, I was also wanting to say...
Sorry, before you go on then, it sounds like you'll be able to come up with some sort of recommendation later on along those lines.
I haven't put the words together yet, but I will work on that, Chair. I also wanted to make a comment on the marketplace one as well, because I'm really pleased Exec Scrutiny highlighted the importance of the business case, because for me, I'm really quite concerned that we don't actually have we haven't seen the business case for the Derby Maid, the Derby Works and the Culture Hotel, and those business cases don't seem to me to be obvious that we have similar things like that already in the city centre, and they aren't vibrant. So, for example, Derby 1 was supposed to be an office building and it's now gone to residential. Derby Maid is similarly replicating some of the activities that would have happened at Dada, which is no longer functioning in that form. And saying that it's in the wrong place, it'll be much better if it's in the marketplace than slightly in the back quarters next to a multi-storey car park, doesn't give me assurance. And I don't want us to end up with being assured that there's a business case and there's a contract and the contract falls apart because the business case wasn't strong enough and we end up with nothing. I'm not reassured. I think that business case has got to be really strong and the contract needs to be really tight. And I'm not sure, I haven't got that confidence at the moment.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be lots more discussions on those subjects, but for now, if as a exec scrutiny board, are we happy to fully endorse the recommendations from the Regen board that are being put to Cabinet on Wednesday? Are we okay with that?
Yep.
No objections? Okay, we can do that, yeah? Good. Okay. Going back to their agenda then, we've dealt with 9 and 10, so we're on to the key decisions and item 11, the School Capitals Programme. You can do that for us.
Thank you, Chair. The School Capital Programme report is a standard routine report that we take each year to Council.
Sorry, do you mind stating your name and your role, please?
Sorry, Steve Allwood, Principal Commissioning Officer in School Organisation Provision. Routine report taken to Cabinet each year to approve the next round of priority school condition capital projects. Council allocated funding annually by the DfE for priority school condition works. The report sets out an indicative condition funding allocation set out in Appendix 1. Due to the timing of the report, this was based on an assumed new allocation for the coming financial year 25-26 and is also subject to financial year end 24-25. Approval of the schemes is required at Cabinet on Wednesday in order to plan, procure and deliver the majority of the works over the summer holiday period. The works fall into sort of 4 broad categories: boiler replacements, including Dale Primary and Redwood Primary, building fabric and structural works at a number of primary schools, roofing works at Murray Park Secondary School and Lord Street Nursery School, and window replacements. The scheme budgets set out in the report are indicative budgets based on feasibilities subject to further detailed design and procurement. More detail of individual schemes is set out in Appendix 2. Headline report is probably the Wren Park Primary School scheme, which is the proposed replacement of an existing 2-classroom block which is past its designed lifespan with a new 4-classroom block and multi-use games area. That scheme is making the most of Section 106, a combined project with Section 106 funding for additional school places and also school condition funding. Council carefully considered the priorities of the schemes based on detailed school condition surveys, and Cabinet will be asked to approve the schemes at its meeting on Wednesday.
Thank you. So as you point out, it's an annual report, fairly standard report, but there are some significant schools in there that's long-term needs are being addressed this year, and the funding levels are reasonable, I think, this year. So as a board, I think we subject to what your questions and comments are, I think we can endorse the report and welcome the ideas in it. And things, Councillor Holmes.
Just a quick one. It's always a curveball, Chair, that I like to throw in here. Climate implications, maybe Councillor Kerr will have some comments about that, but I always try and raise this. Now, it's transport related and never really know where it fits. But I think it's the crisscrossing across the city on car use to get to the various schools does have a huge impact, not just the impact in terms of congestion, but obviously a climate impact as well. And it never really seems to sit anywhere in a report. I've never seen a transport, Nigel might be able to prove me wrong, but I've never really seen a report on the impact and how much traffic there actually is generated for schools travel across the city, but I know it's significant. And obviously reports like this, whilst our capital investment in buildings, I always like to highlight it, Chair, that there is a very significant impact on the city in terms of travel to schools from one side of the city to the other, and so on and so forth. We see it in every ward, and the impact of school parking proves that.
I guess clearly if it's an improvement that involves a new build and new classrooms and expansion of the school, then it's going to get some consideration in planning. But where it's a refurbishment and that leads to improvement or bigger numbers, etc., it might not need planning and may not be considered. But you're right, it is a significant effect. Stephen, did you want to make any comments there?
Yeah, certainly the scheme at Wren Park Primary School will require planning permission, and it's possible or likely that the school will be required to have a school travel plan that will look at sort of mitigating the impacts of the development.
Okay, well ultimately the parents' right to choose the schools contributes to it massively, doesn't it? And that's just another side effect of that right. Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Holmes is right. I was going to mention some things related to climate, but I actually think the climate rondel here is one, and the description that goes with it is one of the best that I've seen, which is really nice to hear. And I agree with the issues about school travel and people who are travelling today compared to last week. It's so much nicer. Schools having just finished. My concern, though, on here is particularly related to the replacement of boilers, because we are replacing boilers new boilers should last significantly more than 10 years, one would hope, and they are replacing this with gas. So the boilers that we're putting in are likely still to be here when we have the aspiration to be zero carbon, and we won't be getting loads and loads of green methane from somewhere. So the underlying question to here is, when it says in the description that we've got a more efficient gas-fired boilers, which are going to be a hybrid heat source, if that's hybrid, meaning that we're going to be looking at the air source to heat for the space heating and the gas for hot water, which will be needed in quantity, for example, in the kitchens, that makes sense. Or if it's a reason that we haven't got sufficient power supply in that area of the city, and we would need to do a significant upgrade of a local substation to be able to get the power in, to be able to do the air source heat, that would make sense. Or if there's no opportunity for putting PVs on the roof because the number of trees nearby, and it's a single-storey school, that would make sense. But this doesn't explain why we're going for hybrid systems, and whether they're hybrid systems that are being built into future planning for being zero carbon or not, because we haven't got that depth of knowledge. I would hope that in what Cabinet have been given and the discussions that's taken place with Cabinet, all that has been covered, but it isn't covered in this report.
Maybe we should ask for that now.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. The schemes for the replacement boilers do include gas-fired boilers and air source heat pumps. Due to technical restrictions and implications of the system-built buildings, system-built nature of the school buildings, it's very difficult to deploy a solely air source or ground source heat pump solution, so that a hybrid approach is put forward.
Chair, thank you for that. It's really repeated what's already in the document. It doesn't cover the readiness for upgrading from what we're installing now to be zero carbon within 10 years, because it doesn't expand on the information that's here. What I would love to see, Chair, is being able to have within our schools capital programme a line which is similar to what we get within the transport capital programme, which is the development of future years. And I think there's something like, I think it was less than 100,000, but may have been £90,000 in the transport element of capital programming, which is the programming for future capital need. And if we had that being done for all our schools, we would be thinking ahead to make sure that when we are doing work on the roof, for example, we are building in the PVs, if appropriate, on a south or east-west facing roof. That it would be telling the school that when they do their internal refurbishment and decorating, they should be putting insulation in those walls because they are solid walls, because they were built in Victorian times. And if we had that sort of work done for every school, we would be more effective at spending our limited capital and the school's limited capital to ensure that we are aiming towards our targets in 10 years' time or less.
Those things, does future years planning, does that account for as far down as climate change and planning in the climate change need to get down to zero?
The schemes are designed to allow for that where possible. The budgets available at the minute aren't able to get us down that route solely at this stage. So whatever we're designing now is designed to allow us the flexibility to go down that route when funding is available.
Yeah, I get that, but maybe Councillor Kerr's point is that what we do now should last us at least 10 years. So it would be too late, and it wouldn't make sense to have to go back into them and change them to meet the net zero requirement. Is that what you were saying, Councillor Kerr?
The big, the large-scale gas systems would be lasting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would expect those to be lasting 15, 20, 25, even 30 years. So if we're putting in something that is has a design life of more than 10 years, which a domestic one may not do, then we should be putting in something that we can use 100% of its lifetime, which we're not doing at the moment. We have got a real challenge because we don't have enough capital to deal with the £24 million worth of outstanding work that we need to be doing. And I absolutely agree that we've got a challenge. And that's why to put some capital money into making sure that we are using future funds as effectively as possible is really important. Hybrid systems would have been, 5 years ago, a hybrid system, a generalist hybrid system would have been the right thing to be doing. But current air-sourced heat has improved, and the efficiencies you can get up to your 60-degree plus water supplies from an air-sourced heat pump. We're not choosing to do it here, and it might be because of the electrical supply. It doesn't tell us. This report is not adequate for me. If I was in Cabinet, I would not be happy making a decision on this alone. I would want more information.
Okay, well, I think all we can do at this point then is to suggest that this committee thinks that future years planning in respect of capital spending on schools is important, and it needs to fully take into account the effects of climate change and the ambitions that we have in that regard. Yeah. Okay, Martin, did you want to come in? And
thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to make similar points really. When we're looking at the particularly for boiler upgrades, which will have a big climate impact, I would hope that wherever possible, the default position is that we're looking at air source heat pumps, the greenest option available. I understand there are constraints in terms of buildings and what technical issues as to what may or may not be possible, and also financial constraints, but I don't know if it does say in the policy somewhere that the default position is that we go for the greenest option that we can within the constraints that we've got, but I would welcome sort of being clear about that, so that when we are looking at the capital programme in the future, we can be assured that you know, the first port of call will be to look at the greenest option that we can, and then they may have, you know, the technical issues and the costs will then come into it. But if we start from that point, then we may be able to you know, look at other funding options and in order to get the greenest outcome that we can.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly then, following on from what's been said, I think it does highlight the aspirational aspect of net zero in terms of the council's ambition within the stated time frame. Really, I mean, I'm not necessarily criticising because I've always been a little bit more pragmatic and realistic in that respect than some. But I think with the larger schemes involving, you know, planning applications, obviously we have biodiversity net gain, but that's to do with habitats and that kind of thing. It isn't to do with mitigating, putting in a boiler or whatever. So I think this aspect really opens up from what we've been talking about here is mitigations, because clearly if we do go with something which isn't necessarily carbon neutral, if you like, from the get-go, and is a hybrid or even based on current technologies which are less efficient for whatever reason, the council is going to have to think about mitigation to meet its ambition of or its target of net zero. So it's an interesting subject really, because I think this is one of those subjects that kind of like highlights how difficult that's going to be, but it needs a conversation, and I think that mitigation is going to be something which is interesting to see in these reports about these particular these projects, where, you know, the aspiration doesn't necessarily mean the doesn't meet the practicalities, if you like, Chair.
Okay, shall we have some loosey words on the subject?
That we recommend that Cabinet seek to use education capital funding to develop and keep up to date zero carbon plans for all the schools we are responsible for, so that future works are planned as effectively as possible in a similar way that Transport Capital has a development funding line in its work programme.
Chair, can I add or mitigation? Because I think we do have to be realistic that it may be mitigation rather than, you know, I just don't think some of that may not be realistic,
Plans
Lucy.
and mitigations.
Yeah, I think so.
Martin, does that take into account enough your point in relation to prioritising the greenest option available? It covers that, do you think? Yes, sorry, yes.
I think that might be revenue. We just have to go back and check, but we haven't got sufficient funding within the education capital pot to do that. So if you did that, the recommendation will probably have to be around revenue, and we'd have to identify revenue and, you know, prioritise it.
Chair.
Yeah, I appreciate the point and pointing out the difference from it being capital and revenue. But maybe, presumably, Steve, there are officers looking at future years' programmes, and I don't know how much of a carbon neutral eye they look at it already.
It would be a revenue pressure for the council to develop a zero carbon strategy or plan for every school. Would be a fairly detailed piece of work, which would need to be revenue funding.
Right, so in terms of when we look at the transport later, that is revenue as well, but there is, in the transport side of things, there's revenue and capital funding, isn't there? Is there?
I can't answer questions on transport, sorry.
No, sorry, I'm looking behind you, Stephen. Emily looks at me as though she's thinking about it.
I was going to say, I think shouldn't be underestimated the resource implication that's being proposed in this suggestion. and the implication for the wider development of the capital programme. If it could be seen as capital, then it's going to withdraw capital from other schools' projects, because that capital, there won't be additional. The pot will remain the same, and something will have to give. And if it's revenue, we don't have that existing resource to do that piece of work. And I think it's worth saying that what is being done, I heard Councillor Rawson say earlier, that what we seek to do is to develop the best option from a carbon perspective within the constraints that we have in terms of finance, but also the constraints of the buildings that we're working on within the school's estate. And that is already our default position, hence why these proposals are coming forward in terms of the hybrid solutions, for example. And so I think I would just urge committee to be minded to understand that there will be a quid pro quo. There won't be additional. This will mean something else goes as a result.
I thought that might prompt a couple of hands back. Who was first? I think you marginally, Lucy.
Chair, I believe there is still money left in the Capital Green Fund, which Andy Hills has been looking after, which was about £3 million originally. So it might be that they could rephrase this and they could use some funding from there for this purpose, if that is something which meets his criteria.
Yeah, I get that.
But
Yes, thank you.
the phrasing that I'd used on this was to recommend that Cabinet seek to use education capital, and I've added in or other funding to develop. I'm not laying it down to Cabinet. I'm saying, look, or we would be saying, please think about this. If it's already happening, they'll turn around and say it's already happening.
Okay, and I think in my view, and probably our view, it's not for us to work out how it's going to get paid for. It's a recommendation that we think is necessary, and it shows a commitment to the council's ambition to go net zero, doesn't it? Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is why I sort of interjected with the suitable mitigations or wording to that effect, because, you know, me personally, I think you'll have to have a realistic way of moving forward, because if there are, and clearly are going to be budgetary restraints to achieving every single aspect of the council that the council does will adhere to net zero aspirations, even if whatever the cost. Well, clearly that's not realistic. So that's why I said I believe the council, it's an aspiration that the council have, and that's my opinion. And actually, it's not criticism from me, because I think there needs to be a more pragmatic approach and a sensible approach over the timeframes involved as well. So it kind of highlights that, really. So I thought there was a get out for the officers saying that this would cost lots of money, it would have to be taken from another budget, it will have impact effectively then on the medium-term financial plan, etc., etc. So I'm not necessarily saying we should force the council into making those decisions, because I don't think it's realistic to put a recommendation to Cabinet to do so. They'll just reject it, I would have thought. So it's a case of highlighting it, in my opinion, and asking for, if it's possible, full fat schemes on climate change and using the right technologies and everything else. But realistically, there may be an option to mitigate. And that's really what I think is in the recommendation now. So I'm not quite sure why officers are really worried about it.
Okay, let's have a look at the version that we've got to at the end, unless you want to come one last time.
So, Chair, you'd like me to read it again?
Yes.
Yeah. Recommend that Cabinet seek to use education capital or other funding to develop and keep up to date zero carbon plans and mitigations for all of the schools we are responsible for, so that future works are planned as effectively as possible, in a similar way that Transport Capital has a development funding line in its work programme.
So that gets the word mitigations in, doesn't it? Yep. Let's bring Councillor Holmes back in, and then
I would have, and again, this might soften it too much for others, but my thoughts were taking mitigation and moving it to the beginning, Lucy. So it would be, say the first line again. Recommend that Cabinet seek to use education or mitigation. Or so it's the option of, if funding is available, that's fine. but alternatively, other mitigations. I think that is, whilst it might be not as strong as you want, I think that's the only realistic way of getting the Cabinet to consider adopting that, personally. Well, you're saying you recommend using funding from a specific area. What I'm saying is, or suitable mitigations.
So you can keep capital funding and other funding and mitigations in the same sentence, basically. So what we're asking, is for...
So I'm basically saying that if they can use funding, that's fine, but we've heard that that is probably unrealistic. So I'm saying, or other mitigations. So they have a choice. In the ideal world,
but you'll have to work out what the other mitigations are.
Well, that's not for us. That's something which would have to be considered.
But is that what the funding is for?
Well, not necessarily, no. I'm saying, look, find mitigations. If you can find it through the funding, fine, but we've heard from officers that that's going to be highly unlikely. So what I'm saying is, or suitable mitigations to offset the carbon. That's...
Councillor Rawson, you want to come back in?
Can I just ask whether this is actually being done already as part of the planning process? So I would have thought that when the strategic planning around works to schools is happening, these sorts of issues will already be looked at, maybe in terms of reviewing the need and then thinking about what the solution is and whether there's a environmentally friendly and carbon neutral way of doing it.
We will ask the question, but I guess what we're suggesting is that the Cabinet need to consider, and officers in the process need to consider the ambition towards climate change. So are we doing this already, Stephen, do you think, or where are we at with this?
So in relation to the schemes proposed, all schemes are carried out in line with the current building regulations and approved codes of practice and approved documents on environmental performance. They're all designed to allow for further improvements when they're affordable and available. But it's not possible to convert all of the council's schools building asset stock with existing budgets to net zero.
We need mitigation.
Chair, what this is asking for is not for the funding to do it all, it's to have plans to be able to do it, which is different. So we want each school should have its programme of this is how we're going to try and get to be as best we can. And that's what we're asking for. Because if the school doesn't have that, this is its roadmap, then it won't be using its own funds to drive that direction. And they need to be kept up to date because technology is changing. I think, Chair, it's up to Cabinet to look at it. And if it's already happening, they'll tell us. If they don't want to accept it, they will tell us. It's up to us to offer it to them as an aspiration.
And hopefully, between now and Wednesday, officers will be able to advise them on where we're at with it all. But,
Absolutely.
so it doesn't stop us making the recommendation. Are you able to send that?
Yep.
As it stands? Is everybody okay with that going forward from committee? Any objections? Oh, okay, good. So be it. Thank you, Stephen, for that. Moving on then, we're on to item 12, the Infrastructure Programme Board Capital Programme.
Thank you, Chair. Verna Bayliss, Director of Sustainability. I'll give you an overview of the report. So this is the annual Infrastructure Board Capital Programme, which you see regularly on an annual basis and seeks the usual approvals and delegations. I guess the thing to note is that it's a continuation of the, since we had a review of the whole capital programme, not just this, but the whole of the Council's capital programme back in 2022. So we've been working through a change process since we took the 2023 Cabinet Infrastructure Board Capital Report, and the outline of what that said is set out in 4.2.3. But generally, it was a move to a more longer, medium-term programming, clearer entry criteria, strengthened governance, and a real focus on asset management. So this programme for 25-26 continues that transition, but now with perhaps the added twist of you've already mentioned that the majority of this capital programme, of this infrastructure board programme, particularly for highways and transport, now comes from MCA. So it doesn't come directly to us from the Department for Transport anymore, it now comes from our regional combined authority. And it therefore includes some brand new funding. So for 25-26, you'll see in the report something called the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, or CRSTS2, if you want to get your teeth around that for the future, and that's sort of explained and set out in 4.3.3. Now, CRSTS2 is only allocated to combined authorities, and it's generally done in 5-year cycles, so the start of the next cycle will be 2027, and MCA has successfully worked with the Department of Transport for some early release of that funding. And you can see in the table at 4.3.2, the allocations to the 4 constituent authorities from MCA, and that's 1 year of CRSTS. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that this year we have had a reduction in unsupported capital borrowing to minimise our exposure to revenue costs of borrowing, and I'm sure you're all very well aware with that from the MTFP process. But perhaps with the difference of capital funding for parks and open spaces, which was agreed at full council, of which 500k for this financial year and 500k again for the next. And that funding will really help for us to drive our asset management approach that we've done very successfully through highways, through transport, traffic signals, etc., through the parks system. I guess the other key things just to note, just skipping my way through it, is I know that this, and you've talked about what a difference this programme makes to you on the ground, and over the last 12 months, there's just a taster of some of the things that have been delivered at 4.2.1, and we've achieved a great deal. I appreciate the concerns that you've raised, and we talked through its scrutiny, but we have achieved a great deal this year, alongside coming to the end of our £60 million worth of Transforming Cities Fund programme. So, as I said, CRSTS2 is only funded through MCA, and it was allocated by their board in March. So, again, we've been waiting for that approval to be able to bring this to you when we try and understand some of the full implications of that. And perhaps one thing to note, a point of difference, is that one of the schemes that were allocated funding to by MCA was for Merrillway, and that's one of a regional set of schemes that MCA have allocated, and that will be led by MCA. So they're regional schemes, although they have an impact here in Derby and for other areas across the D2N2 footprint. Again, another thing to note is MCA is still maturing. I think some of you will be very, very familiar with this. So we don't have some of the granular detail of what they will require from us in terms of assurance and performance. So there are some assumptions in this document, and such as the highway maintenance block funding, which we've had year in, year out. We're anticipating that will be transferred to us this year with minimal reporting back requirements. Might not be the case going forward, but certainly for the first year, so that we can get stuff out the door. We would also, one of the things that this programme has always been driven by is our own local transport plan, and with the arrival of MCA as the new transport authority, we will see a new regional transport plan, and we expect to see a draft of that come out across this new financial year. And again, that will influence how this programme is shaped strategically over coming years. What we do know at the moment is set out in 4.6, and we know that there'll be a much greater focus on having evidence base for what we want to spend, that we need to think about growth, housing and the economy. CRSTS has the word sustainable in its title, and therefore we know that sustainability in the environment will be a key requirement of our funding. Asset management and those principles will certainly continue. And critically and certainly interestingly for us, a people-centred approach, so promoting socially and physically active people in their communities. And all of that we need to start thinking about our what we want to fund in a much more holistic, a much more integrated, place-based way, if you like, for a shorthand, linking those sorts of strategic aims together, because that's what EMCA will demand of us from the funding they are giving. As I've said, we're building on changes we've already made to the programme, and that's set out in 4.6. And we're now looking to progress with an approach that's going to help us manage some of this increasing complexity, because as you've all identified, while that additional funding is really very, very welcome, we know that our resources at the moment are currently the same. We know we've got issues with skills out there in the wider sector, and we know that the other three authorities will be looking for the same. So what we're proposing in this document at 4.6 is we start to move towards a three-level type approach. So we talk about micro schemes, those small schemes that you've alluded to already, where we'd seek to take a citywide programming view, assessed through our asset management principles and programming, working closely, as of course you would expect, with our neighbourhood teams. And then looking at small and medium programmes, and this really is anchoring in through those neighbourhood partnership plans, replacing the current annual cycle, annual expectation that we knew was a criticism that came out through the capital programme review, this annual ward transport priorities. So we want to change to, and this change gives you a real opportunity in neighbourhoods to consider and develop 3-year plans where transport is part of an integrated, coherent plan that focuses on place, people and sustainability. And that really recognises, as has already been alluded to today, that those strategic changes in the region mean that we have to address those emerging requirements of EMCA through the funding that they provide. And last, large and major schemes. So this will be large-scale, the complex, multi-year scheme that we'll have to take through feasibility, lots of studies, lots of work, and there'll be major benefits associated with them. Again, aligned to growth, to housing, and to sustainability. And we absolutely recognise we've been on this journey of change now for a couple of years. We introduced things like a programme entry criteria. We will continue to refine that. But we know that we need to work with you, with neighbourhood boards particularly, to support from a training and communication perspective and to refine how we manage programmes. And I say that very advisedly. It's not just little projects and schemes. This is big programmes of change that we've now really got an opportunity to develop because of that CRSTS2 funding and because of the funding that EMCA brings to us. And for the first time, really, we can develop those because we know we've got the confidence of that long-term funding on a more sustainable basis. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Verna. I think we all welcome and appreciate the new CR2D2. And that's what I'm going to refer to it. Yeah, we always welcome more funding, but I have to say, capital programmes and delivering of them have not been our strongest suit over the years. I think we've had comments about that. So I am quite seriously concerned about our ability to deliver some of this, and I think most of this in actual fact. But my personal, the last point is the need not to lose sight of the fact that we absolutely need to be spending time and effort in looking and strategising around the major schemes for the city. We know we've got the A38 situation, but there are other major priorities that the city needs. So I'll throw in one for the Pentagon Island. Nigel knows that's a pet scheme of mine. But we need to be working on it and being in the right position to be able to bid for them when this R2D2 money comes forward. So those are my Matt Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just speak for a couple of minutes on potholes? It was mentioned about funding, which is very welcome. A few years ago, I was speaking to officers about different proactive ways of detecting road defects, potholes, etc. And we were speaking about the cameras on buses and council vehicles that would map the road and report back. And I know a small number of local authorities do that. And I just wondered whether officers have heard anything from those local authorities as to whether that's been a positive move for them and if it's improved the situation. Now, I'm a serial user of the council's My Account system, and I think it works reasonably well. But myself, my colleagues can't be seeing every inch of the road network in our area all the time and in down cul-de-sacs and all the different routes. So we promote, like I'm sure everybody else does, that ability to actually tell the council about a road defect to residents and try and encourage them to actually report along with councillors when we're out and about doing our casework, etc. And you can do that without an account, by the way. It's just press a button, put the details in. So it is fairly straightforward, but you do have to go online with your phone or on a computer. So do officers have any ideas on how we might be able to ramp that up and be a little bit more proactive, maybe a little bit of PR with the public to actually get them to join us in reporting potholes and getting them filled and road defects repaired with this extra funding and the funding that we actually have? Yeah, it's just that really. Oh, and the other thing, Chair, just on the MCA, because obviously it's all about strategic, we know that, very high level stuff. Is pothole reporting at the granular level, is that still going to be within the council, or is it going to be in some kind of big region-wide management system that logs potholes and sort of divvies out the funding to a wider area rather than Derby City having its own pot?
Who wants to have a go at those? Nigel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Interesting on the technology to identify defects and road condition. We do use periodic sort of electronic scanning of the road surface, and we tend to commission that rather than using buses and other vehicles. Basically, because the technology is so much better if you do it that way around, although there are some advances with AI scanning some of the imagery. It's a mixed bag, the feedback from other authorities as to where it's useful and where it's not, what it detects. But it's definitely a field where I think there's some development. So that's something that we'll continue to watch and embed in the asset management processes, because good asset management basically relies on good data. So, that's definitely something that I think is a developing field. In terms of reporting, absolutely, quite welcome the ideas of reporting defects, etc. What is and what isn't a pothole, and what is and what isn't a defect is an interesting one, and it can create its own rumblings, because quite often it's not a pothole, but actually ride quality is quite poor as a result of things that are not defects. But I appreciate that we use the same roads as everybody else. We feel the same things. In terms of reporting potholes and stuff, MCA is a strategic transport authority. It's not a highway authority. So the highways matters still sit within the control of the constituent authorities.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the officer for the report. It is very detailed, and obviously the extra money from MCA is really welcome into the city. Can I just comment on item 12, appendix 3, page 77, where it mentions a drop curb programme. When I asked about this for Blakery's Ward, I was told by the office there isn't such a thing. But clearly, Levain Road have had the pleasure of enjoying a dropped curb programme. I can recall back in the Mick Watts day, we were asked, each councillor was asked every year where they would like their drop curbs allocating in the ward. That seems to have gone by the by, and I understand, obviously, the monetary situation. But clearly, I'd like a little bit more detail on that, not necessarily now, but certainly from an officer in the next week or so. And then the following page, page 78, section 106, contributions. The 7th from the bottom, it says Sunny Hill Recreation Ground. The development location was the rear of Tesco, Stenson Road. And it's got the ward as Blakeries. It isn't. It's Normanton Ward. The actual rear of Tesco is Blakeries Ward, but the money where it's spent in Sunny Hill Recreation Ground is not Blakeries, it's Normanton. So if that could be corrected. but obviously all these improvements, and I know obviously every ward councillor present here this evening or otherwise, I'm sure they can list numerous initiatives that they want for their wards. But I do think Blakeridge is missing out somewhat from this report, and I hope to see an improvement in that in the future. It's important that officers work with councillors, not only the neighbourhood team, but they need to think of the councillors who are representing their constituents, who have, you know, emails flying in every hour of the day regarding potholes, parking and hazards on the carriageway and highway. So I think it's important that councillors are kept informed with all these initiatives. Thank you.
I think it works both ways, Councillor Bolton, and I think officers might say to well, make sure it gets into your neighbourhood plan, because that's where they'll be going for initial consideration as to what's going to be done so in future. So, right, who else? Councillor Bonson.
Yes, just a very brief comment. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, very welcome additional funding, and thank you very much for the detailed report. I just wanted to highlight how nice it is to see that green wheel on a report at section 10, I think it is, section 9, the climate implications. It's not very often we see so much green on those wheels, so I thought that was very welcome. Thank you.
Lucy, were you happy with the green wheel on this one?
Well, I'm afraid I thought that it was an overly green wheel, because whenever you get your big tarmac spreader, even if it's recycling all the tarmac on the road, it is still going to be having.
Well, we've raised this, we'll see how quickly they improve their wheels.
So
that wasn't what were you going to talk about?
It was not what I was going to talk about. No, I was wanting to pick up the two issues in particular. One is the issue about staffing, and I really recognise that we have lost a number of people who have retired over the last few months, and they took with them an enormous amount of experience of the city and the history of things that have happened in the city, and that is really valuable. And we do need to rebuild and strengthen that team. And I'm hoping that, as well as recruiting people in who have already got that 5 years experience, we'll also be looking at people who can come in at an apprentice level and become technicians, because they are people who will potentially move on. So it'd be really reassuring if we know that we're going to have apprentice level entry into the highways and transport team, so that we are rebuilding our local expertise. The second thing I wanted to raise was the way in which we are working with MCA, which we alluded to earlier, and how we deal with all the little issues that we have in our wards that we know that we want to deal with. And I think those need to be packaged, and I think we need to work with MCA, because it won't just be us, it'll be Nottingham, it'll be Nottinghamshire, it'll be Derbyshire, who also have these issues, so that they can be put together as packages, which might be walking routes to bus stops. And that might mean drop curbs, or it might mean a bollard to stop people parking on the pavement, so that you have got a decent walking route to a bus stop. It happens in every ward, in all the areas, and we as councillors need to be involved in identifying walking routes to bus stops as a pattern of things that we have a single lump of funding and we solve the problems across a large part of the city. I'm not sure where funding for the LC WIP comes into this. There is, we want to deliver a local walking infrastructure plan, but it doesn't seem to be brought out. I didn't spot that strategically here. And if we look at we're putting far more money in looking at our strategic networks. And yes, roads wear out faster than pavements, because a car or a lorry is so much heavier than a person walking. But if we want to have good walking routes to the city centre or to our district centres, we need to be putting them onto a strategic network as well. The route that I know best, the route that I come in along, is down Utoxeter Road. I'm a cyclist, usually. I'm on the road. But the pavement is not one to encourage people to walk on. It's got those curbed crossings, it's got potholes, it's got bits of cobbling still in some places. If we want to have routes that people will choose to walk on, with nice crossings across side roads so that they will want to walk. We need to look at those strategic routes to places that people want to get to and have them as part of a priority that we can offer to MCA. So Chair, I wanted to pick up those two things, and I'm happy to put together, I've got some drafted recommendations about developing packages of small works that can meet MCA's strategic priorities at a local level. And also, I think we need to be working closely with local councillors and neighbourhood teams to construct those packages. And also to recommend to Cabinet that highways and footway capital schemes also incorporate changes to include small incremental improvements like drop curbs and tactiles for crossing points and desire lines. Because one of our frustrations last year, I had given up, no, I hadn't given up. I had some standard wording to report back to people about how we had to be patient to get some really awful pavements improved, and they are now lovely. But while we re-tarmacked the long length of Cordon Avenue and Chain Lane, we could have also put in some small bits of extra tarmacs and tactiles for crossing the side roads and for picking up desire lines that needed to go across grassed areas. We didn't do that, and we should have done that as part of that capital work. And they would then take those wish lists out of some other wish lists.
Okay, Lucy, yes. I'm going to take some advice on this, but I don't think that those recommendations would be viable at this point in time to ask MCA or to recommend that MCA consider these things. They, as we've heard, they are a fledgling organisation and they're looking to set their own priorities, which we won't have the makings of a plan until March next year. I'm going to go to Nigel with it because it's just not their bag, if you like. We as councillors should be feeding in through the neighbourhood scheme what needs doing and working it up from there. Nigel, MCA's relationship to small local projects.
Yeah. Within the MCA funding that's come through, we've still got integrated transport block as we would have had in previous years, but it's held at the same amount of funding, so around 1.8 million, and that's not going to be increased anytime soon. Within the CRSTS allocation, or if you struggle with that, people are starting to refer to it as crust. But within that allocation, there's an element that we've identified for local scheme development. And I think there's a couple of things within the funding that are probably worth explaining. Exactly as Councillor Carey has alluded to, when we talk about the small and medium schemes and building those into a plan, it is exactly that package of measures that we're after. Coherent themes that are about, is it walking to school? Is it something around a district centre? Something where you can actually have beneficial impact by delivering more than we would have done through annual priority selection. So how do we put together coherency that's around place, people and sustainability? Because the other thing is, MCA want it to be quality. They want it to be lasting and have an impact that's a benefit within a local area. Absolutely, our intention is to work with local councillors, with the neighbourhood teams, with the officers from not just transport, but there is an integration here with parks and Move More and all the rest of that. We need to bring a lot of this together. And this is, to be honest, quite a big change. So we recognise we've got to change quite a bit. We've got to change quite a bit in governance. We're also trying to weave this with MCA a little bit as well in terms of their direction and how we respond to that. So this is something that we recognise is tricky. I think the other thing to look at in terms of this document and some of the financing that's in it, a lot of the schemes are not meant to be delivered within the year. They're financed for a year as probably the year one of a 7-year programme. So when you look at the Inner Ring Road, for example, we're not going to do anything physically on the Inner Ring Road this year. It might be 2030 before there's a scheme developed because it's such a big issue. So a lot of what MCA are funding is capacity and capability across the region to try and build up a pipeline of schemes that can be funded, because the CRSDS fund, when it's fully released, is 1.5 billion. So, I mean, that's a phenomenal amount, even spread over a large geographic region. That's a phenomenal amount of funding that's guaranteed to 2032. You know, we've never seen money like that. So I think, you know, there's a couple of things just to get hold of. LCWIP as well will be part of the mayoral plan or the new regional transport plan, depending how they budget, but basically the new LTP. It will be specifically referenced, and we expect it to be specifically funded as that document comes out. In the meantime, if within ward plans there are walking and cycling activities that people want to get together as part of schemes, etc., then again, that's something that we can look at. And the difference between where we've had individual annual priorities that have been selected out of that 1.8 million of integrated transport plan, they've always been capped at a very low level. Access into CRSTS by programming and packaging, as Councillor Kerr said, actually elevates the amount of funding that can be available to these schemes. But 3-year plan, there's a bit of a vision in each area. Just come back to a few other things as well. Absolutely take the point about strategic networks and footways. I think that's really important. There's a good chance here. CRSTS funding, when you look at other combined authorities who've had CRSTS 1, the amount they've been able to spend on pure maintenance has diminished year on year without being able to put a sustainability case around it. So again, some of the things that Councillor Kerr has mentioned, whether they're part of a local package or a strategic package, are exactly the way to keep basically improving infrastructure. But you've got to have more than just new tarmac. You know, it's either got to be adaptation, drainage, planting trees, boulevarding, whatever, you know, just trying to make the area more place-centred and more people-focused and more sustainable. Just coming back to drop curbs and Councillor Bolton, basically we put 20k in the budget lines this year for the first time for 2 years because we've got a bit more money. So we've been able to identify for a very small programme of drop curbs. But of course, drop curbs and accessibility could be part, again, of coherent regional planning. So I think, on the whole, it's good news, but I do recognise it's a change. And I absolutely recognise that we're going to have to work with councillors at a ward-by-ward level. And indeed, you know, my team are going to have to change the way they do things. We've already spoke to neighbourhood officers' teams about, you know, what's coming and how they're going to have to change and how that works with cementing around the other planning processes. Yeah, I hope that's covered most of what's been raised.
Well, the 20k should do about 2.5 drop curbs, shouldn't it, Nigel? That'd be useful. Yeah, I think we all accept we're going to have to manage our expectations and change the way that we look at the way things are changing, about things, how things are done. But we need a clear direction. And one of the things I was intending raising with you earlier was, or at some point, is that this is effectively an annual report. It's the annual capital programme. I wouldn't want to have to wait another year before we get an update on it. When we do get a clearer direction as to how it's all going to work, I think you certainly need to come back to us or the appropriate scrutiny board to update us, because that's when we might be able to look at more detailed recommendations for me. Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Just going back, Chair, to Councillor Kerr's sort of recommendation. It wasn't mentioned when we were talking about the recommendation at the start of the meeting about Regen Board and local transport priorities. But part of quite a lot of time in that board was actually discussing with officers about trying to restore the ability for local transport priorities to be able to be delivered at a ward level and by councillors and the neighbourhood boards. But there was a clear steer from officers, and actually I went away and thought about it, and I totally agree that we need to think about what Councillor Kerr has suggested, which is what officers are pushing us in the direction towards, is packages. So whilst we might want double yellows to improve line of sight on that junction there and maybe one over there, it needs to be really in a more of a, well, what are you trying to achieve? What are the wider issues? What is a package of measures? Could a package of measures be delivered to actually achieve or solve that problem in a wider sense? So for me, the conversation about the delivery of local transport priorities is exactly what Councillor Kerr has just put forward, really, that we are going to be having to work as ward councillors to think of much wider schemes with lots of small elements in them to present as this is our plan, this is what we're trying to achieve. We work with officers not to tell them, but work with them for them to build the solutions for us. I think that was clear as well. We might think that double yellows on a junction exactly the solution required. Well, we're not transport officers, so we need to start thinking about slightly bigger.
This is the point that there's no point, there might be no point putting double yellow lines on that junction if you don't do the next three in line or whatever. Which is why, as an example, in Spondon we've chosen to prioritise one particular stretch of road that needs a crossing, that needs junction works, that needs pavement improvements, and then you get more sustainable corridor that's been improved and can show a result. Just, Lucy, go with these, read us these two ideas that you've got, but I'm not sure that now's the time to put these forward, but go on.
I'll read them again, Chair. So the first one says, recommend that Cabinet develop packages of small local works that can meet MCA's strategic priorities at a local level, and to be working closely with local councillors and neighbourhood teams to construct these packages.
Chair, can I just jump in there very quickly? That sounds very much to me as though you're potentially imposing transport schemes on local councillors, and I know all of us here would be horrified by that. We want to drive what we want for our local area, not have it sort of top down. That's my first.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lucy, that one doesn't work for me at this stage.
So if I say rather than working closely with, led by.
No, I think to even to refer to MCA at this point with that doesn't work for me until we know more about the way the plan's going forward. Nigel, I don't want to get too bogged down because we've got lots to cover.
Chair, if I may, I think the purpose of the report is what Councillor Kerr is suggesting as an amendment, that we actually work with the emerging criteria of MCA and the additional funding that's available. And the creative way of working with that is to create packages for these small and medium-sized interventions, as I've just described. The really small stuff like missing a white line, a sign's gone, can we have an additional sign? That's kind of road maintenance, and we're suggesting that through those micro interventions that we will have a channel where we just deal with that as maintenance in a much clearer way than we have done in the past, where they don't have to become micro priorities, if I can put it that way. You know, the priorities are what's in the plan, and it's these packages of measures. And I think that's the purpose of the report. I think there's just a bit of misunderstanding here.
Can I ask you to liaise with Councillor Kerr and just explain where you're coming from on that? And if there is something that you can agree or something, you can come back to me and we can get something done before Wednesday. Is that okay, Lucy? Yeah. Right, I'm going to move on then from that. So, in general, we obviously note the report and welcome the extra funding and look forward to future updates in relation to progress on the regional transport plan.
I'd also say, Chair, as well, we welcome the change in governance arrangements and the opportunity for us as local ward councillors to have more involvement in setting those priorities. So.
Sorry. I think that's to come. Let's leave it at that general comment, yeah? Okay, moving on then. Where are we? Item 13. Yes. Land situated off Stores Road. Thoughts, comments? Who's going to introduce this for us? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. It's Simon Aiken, Director of Communities. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet approval for the purchase of 7.5 acres of land which is situated just off of Stores Road as per Appendix 1 on the site plan. The recommendation is to approve the purchase of 7.5 acres of industrial land and also to delegate authority to the Director of Corporate Governance, Property and Procurement following consultation with the Section 151 officer and the relevant Cabinet member to agree the final terms of that purchase. So the reason we're looking to purchase that land is the council's current depot site at Stores Road is far too small, both from a spatial point of view and also in terms of our operating licence. And we've got the current services that are running out of Stores Road. We're going to be adding to those with the planned expansion of the council's highway section, and that's due to the MCA investment, which Nigel's been discussing. We've also got the rollout of a weekly food waste collection service, which comes online from the 1st of April 26, and that's going to bring in additional 14 7.5 tonne vehicles and relevant staffing to go with that. To resolve the capacity issue, we have been working with external contractors. We commissioned them to complete a high-level feasibility to determine whether the existing highway service at Stores Road could be relocated, and a part of the plan of that is attached to Appendix 2. We have been discussing this proposal with the relevant cabinet member, and Cheddiston West Ward councillors have been briefed on what we're looking to do. We have also been looking at other sites across Derby to see whether we could find another piece of land and to see whether we can do something different. But unfortunately, due to land of this nature and size, there isn't that much of it within the Derby boundary. From a financial point of view, the purchase of the land will be funded from the Stores Road depot scheme that is included on the current capital programme, and any additional works to the site will be subject to a future cabinet report requesting the necessary approvals for that to be done. From a legal perspective, we do have risks of breaching the operating licence if we do nothing, and then we've also got the breach of the new simpler recycling legislation which the food waste collection sits within. When we do bring back a full report following that further feasibility, there will be a environmental impact assessment will be added onto that report when that's been developed as part of that process. And then one thing just to add is that obviously with this acquisition and the building of a new extended highways hub, this will bring opportunities and jobs into the city. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think there's any denial of the fact that Stores Road has been struggling for room and space and the limitations that that's given us. Just a couple of questions from me. There's nothing in the report about, yes, there's negotiations, that there's no numbers involved there. Is this, and I'm not exactly clear about this site, is because there was another site on there, or a site on there that Trent Barton were looking at bought with a view to moving their operation to.
Thank you, Chair. So financials and location is within the pink paper. Thank you.
Okay. So there is opportunity to talk more in the pink paper. Okay. Councillor Kerr.
Since the work would have started on this, because I know it's been a fairly long, drawn-out process looking at what we're going to do about Stores Road, the local government reorganisation has reared its head a few months ago, and we would now anticipate that, for example, our waste collection, we would be collecting from, I imagine, within the city areas like Stenson Fields and the bits of that's stuck on the edge of Mickletover and so on. So there's going to be a reorganisation and additional vehicles needed working out of our local depot. Has that sort of additional capacity, and of course the additional capacity for the new 12,000 properties that are going to be built over the next 15 years or whatever it is, has that all been built into the anticipation of the land that we need?
Okay, I'm sure considerations has always been given to the LGR factors, but other local authorities have their own arrangements not too far away as well. Simon, are you building in the potential future years planning, shall we say?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. So the relocation of the highways function from Stores Road will create space in the current Stores Road depot. It will be limited space, but it will create some space in there. And we have been having high-level discussions with other authorities around how we could future-proof the highways hub so that we could bring some additional people into it should we need to. But as Chair mentioned, the waste services will generally have satellite depots, and I'd imagine that at least in the short term they'll be still operating from those satellite depots due to the round reconfigurations and stuff. Thank you.
Okay, so generally I think we should note the report. On that one we can talk in a bit more detail on pink papers. Okay, moving on then to item 14, which is contract and financial procedure matters.
Thanks, Chair. Tony Nash, Head of Finance. This report includes several items and I'll take you through each of them. Item 1 is to approve the issue of a VEET notice, which is a notice to award to a certain provider without competition. And this is at a value of £283,000 and it's to WinCare UK. This is for the provision, training and maintenance of manga lifting equipment to support the delivery of the Care Homes Fall project. The ICB have funded both the team and the equipment, however the funding has been passed to Derby City Council to manage the whole process. The contract in place between ICB and Derby City specifies the name supplier of the lifting equipment, and that's WinCare. WinCare UK are the manufacturer of the Mangar lifting cushion. Rather than sourcing from individual suppliers, it's more cost effective to procure it directly from them. WinCare are also able to offer bespoke training and maintenance of the equipment that other suppliers don't. So that's item 1.
Okay, sorry, I'll just ask if there's any questions, queries as we go through on that, anything on that matter. Details are in the report. Item 2 then.
Item 2 is to delegate authority to enter into a grant agreement and subsequently award the grant to the National Taekwondo Club of Derby for £60,000. This is for works at the King George V Pavilion. This is match funding following the Taekwondo Club's successful bid to the Community Ownership Fund to help fund the refurbishment of the building. They were notified that they'd been successful in securing £240,000 funding from the fund on the condition that they secure £60,000 match funding. The proposed match funding consists of £55,000 Section 106 funding, and the reference is in the report, and £5,000 funded from the Blaegreaves Neighbourhood Board existing revenue budget. For expedience, delegations are requested to agree the final grant terms with the club to ensure that the works progress in a timely manner, and the proposed works are outlined on 4.2.4 of the report.
Any questions on that one? Councillor Bolton?
I mean, obviously the Blaegreaves councillors have been involved, as has been highlighted by the officer, by funding it from this year's budget and indeed last year's budget. And it is going to be a worthy community project. And thank everybody who's been involved with it. I know there has been quite a lot of work behind the scenes to enable this to take place in the community. So I'm appreciative to everybody involved. Thank you.
So the next one is to approve a bid to the National Trading Standards for funding of the amount of £427,000 for the financial year 25-26 to support the ongoing costs associated with bringing a complex fraud investigation before the courts. It also asks for delegations to bid for and accept this grant in future years while this fraud investigation continues. This has been to Cabinet before for previous allocations, and this delegation hopes to streamline the process for future years. National Trading Standards have been providing funding to Derby City for this since 2019.
Yeah, I've got a quick query on this one. And you touched on it there. They've been at this for 6 years. They've had large allocations of funding from Trading Standards nationally to do it. It's a big operation. It's a lot of resource. And the trial's not set till May next year. Value for money at the public purse. We're looking. Are we assured that that's there? And my other point is, the report suggests that you no need to bring it back to Cabinet in future years. I think that's wrong. I think we need to keep on top of spending on such things and up to date on major investigations like that.
So, Chair, the delegation's about accepting the bidding for and accepting the funding to help with this. So that's why I was suggesting we don't come back for that in future years, because we would continue to want to bid for and accept the funding. But yeah, question on value for money is a good question, and I'll get some responses back to you on that. So item 4 is a bid for an acceptance of £760,000 from DWP Youth Guarantee Trailblazing Funding. This is part of the Governance Get Britain Working White Paper, and Derby is part of the MCA Trailblazing piloting the initiative. This is a one-year pilot for 25-26 and will help advise the design for future years of the Youth Guarantee funding. This is targeting 200 young people aged between 17 and 25, including care experience, and send young people in deprived communities of Derby. The aim is to secure jobs and utilise the 6 to 12-week training programme to build the capacity and capability to sustain work.
Skills funding being coming down from MCO at the end of the day. Yes, Lucy.
I was wondering how this was going to be operating in terms of, do people volunteer into it? Is it going to be young people who are already at college? What about people who are being homeschooled or out of school? How do they get involved?
The report's actually quite, all the supporting information is fairly detailed. It outlines a lot of the schemes that will be included in this funding, doesn't it? Do you need more information than that, Lucy?
I think it's the practical.
Can you get one of the officers to speak to Councillor Kerr and go through it?
Yeah, if you want to have a read of it and then just drop me an email of what further information you need, I'll get that back to you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Item 5 is to approve the acceptance of the final 24-25 element of the MHCLG Rough Sleeping Winter Pressures Grant for £257,000 and allocate this to Derby Homes. Whilst these funds needed to be committed in 24-25, the Council has till Q2 of 25-26 to provide the details to the MHCLG of the impact that the grant funding has made from the activities funded. The intention is to use the funding to contribute towards incentives in 25-26 to private rented sector landlords to maintain tenancies at risk of ending. This will be reviewed during the early part of 25-26 to ensure that the grant is used to deliver optimum outcomes.
And being dealt with by Derby Homes. Any questions, comments? No. Next.
Item 6 is to note the acceptance from DEFRA of £1.676 million capital transitional grant funding for implementing weekly food waste collections, and to approve the acceptance of £544,000 transitional revenue funding from DEFRA and approve carrying this forward into 25-26, and this is to be ring-fenced for future waste collections. Changes in waste regulations from the Simply Recycling require the Council to implement changes in our collection service. The funding is required to enable the commencement of a weekly food waste collection scheme in Derby by the deadline of 1st of April 2026. The changes being implemented are mandated in law under the Environmental Act 2021, giving us directive to implement the required changes. A weekly food waste collection needs to be implemented by the 1st of April. I think I've said that twice, sorry. Any questions on that one?
I don't think we should argue against receiving the funding to support this. Simon, as an overall, where are we at? Is it still going to cost us? What about in terms of the cost of acquiring the land? Can we get that from DEFRA?
Thank you, Chair. We're still waiting to hear what the revenue funding will be, so that should be coming out in spring. At that point, we'll be able to do a financial assessment on it and see whether there are any gaps. But yeah, we're currently waiting for that to come through.
Okay, and this is for April next year, when they start? We need to monitor that gap and keep us informed about any gap between the funding available and the requirements that they put in on us.
We will do, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Thanks, Chair. Just very, very quickly on that. Can we just be reminded again the mechanics of the weekly food collection? So, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be a smaller bin that clips inside another one. Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor. Hi. So the run-ins of the food waste service will have essentially 2 bins in each household. So that will be a small caddy that people can have in their kitchen, and then an outside bin that they can tip the caddy waste into, and that's the bin then that they'll present on the curbside each week. Thank you.
So, Chair, we're to expect another full-size bin alongside our regular black and recycling blue.
No, it's the outdoor one is much smaller than a normal size bin.
So where did I get the clipping thing from? I imagine for some reason there was a slightly larger one with a clip-in section. Am I completely wrong?
I think other authorities have got various ways of collecting it, haven't they?
So a mini bin then, right, to go alongside your larger bins?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so the next one.
Thank you, Chair. The final item is acceptance of ENCA funding for £5 million for 2 capital projects and associated delegations. On the 4th of November 24, the EMCA board agreed to earmark at least £9.5 million capital funding for strategically important projects to boost the local economy and make an impact on the region. EMCA then undertook a focused exercise to identify suitable projects. 2 schemes in Derby were identified during January and February, and officers have been working with EMCA to provide details of the proposals. At their meeting on the 24th of February, EMCA's investment panel recommended 6 projects for approval, including the 2 from Derby City, and on the 10th of March, EMCA's board approved funding for these projects. The 2 schemes in Derby are Infinity Prototyping Centre at £1.5 million and Derby City Centre Development Enabling at £3.5 million. Details of these projects are outlined in section 4.7.3 and 4.7.4 of the report. And we've also got Catherine here for any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay. Again, we should welcome any funding that's come hands down from EMCA, and I think from reading the papers, it's 9-something million that they've handed out, and 5 million of that's coming to Derby, so that's not a bad result in terms of the first one. But I do have some concerns, and I'll probably talk to you separately about these, but and I don't know who to talk to exactly, but nuclear AMRC, I didn't even know that had failed, if you like, and was being replaced with something. So I'm interested as to how that's come about, because there could be questions about throwing good money after bad. I don't know how different the operations are, but I'll talk to you perhaps offline about those. And the other one, again, I think I'll need to talk to somebody about that, because the way I read it is 3.5 million for city centre schemes. It sounds like maybe a way of supporting the marketplace ratings. Is that what's, just go through it for you, or is what generally they are?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to have an offline discussion about the, excuse me, the Infinity Prototyping Centre, but just to be clear on that, the partners that we're proposing to work with on that moving forward have been involved in the project from the beginning, so the University of Derby specifically, but we can discuss more detail offline. And then the city centre project, there's a number of pipeline schemes that we are talking to EMCA about across the city centre. For the avoidance of doubt, this funding isn't specifically ring-fenced or earmarked at the moment for any activity on the marketplace regeneration scheme. It's for other opportunities that EMCA are interested in supporting us with across other parts of the city centre to bring forward housing, commercial development and new jobs.
So when will those details be available, those details of that pipeline, and who to? Regeneration Board, Scrutiny Board?
So we've, part of the report being brought to Cabinet this week is to seek the delegated approvals to finally sign off the activity that will be supported with that funding and any associated grant funding agreements. So delegated decisions, I believe, and Emily will correct me if I'm wrong, but delegated decisions are open for scrutiny. So at the point where we take that delegated decision, that could be brought to the Regeneration Board, which we expect to be in the next couple of months.
Okay, let's not lose sight of the openness and transparency. We do need to have a sight of what these schemes might be whilst funding's welcome. We need to understand how it's being prioritised and where and the potential viability of them.
Yeah. Happy to do that, Chair. The other point to reference is that some of the activity is commercially sensitive, so as and when we bring that to a scrutiny board, we just need to allow for that in the arrangements.
Okay, we'll speak in more detail about all those. Any other questions, comments? No? Good. So, item 15 and the Council's delivery plan. Waiting patiently again in the back there. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Walker, Head of Strategy, Performance and Partnerships. So, back in February, executive scrutiny colleagues will recall that you considered the refresh of the council plan. This report is presenting our annual delivery plan to Cabinet for approval. This translates those high-level commitments from the council plan into specific must-dos for the financial year of 25-26. We are currently working alongside our colleagues to develop the supporting performance framework, so those performance metrics that would be considered as part of our quarterly performance monitoring framework, and anticipating presenting those alongside the Q4 monitoring report. The methodology that we use in terms of the refresh of the council delivery plan is consistent, so the format will be consistent with what colleagues have seen previously. And what we've done this year is seek to tighten our overall planning framework in terms of what is identified through our departmental and service business plans, and ensure that we're translating that effectively into the council delivery plan in terms of consistency of language, etc. I'm happy to take any questions. This obviously forms the backbone of what we report through to Cabinet and Executive Scrutiny quarterly as part of our performance monitoring framework, alongside our strategic risk register and also our priority projects, which are reflected within the council delivery plan. But it is just one of our standard annual update reports for approval.
Can I ask, Sarah, is there any mechanism or any way of showing any I don't know what's the significant change, but highlighting any significant changes to the plan for people to look at? Because if it's the same format and the same categories, it's sometimes difficult to pick out what it is that's changed and where the plan has changed.
Yeah, so I'm happy to share that with colleagues. Obviously, we have those workings out behind this document. In terms of an overview, obviously, there have been changes in relation to the wording of the priority themes and some of the outcomes, which was reflected within the report that came in February. Many of the commitments in terms of the must-dos are actually relatively consistent with what we've had before. We have some new areas that have been identified in terms of emerging priorities, opportunities and also threats. In terms of our overall volume of activity, I think we had about 54 or 55 commitments last year. We're looking at about 50 this year. So we've got relative consistency in what we're working to deliver against, recognising that a lot of the work that we have to make impact in those priority themes, those outcomes for the city, is quite medium to long term. But obviously the review of that within the year, we try to keep relatively focused. So if anybody is particularly interested in what's changed, I'm happy to send more detail through to those councillors and have conversations. We've got all of that tracked out, sitting behind this document. And again, we'll show those workings out with the performance measures as well. There are some where we've completed them and they just come off the plan, obviously, as we move through the year. The other thing to mention is it's a dynamic plan. So if we do propose changes as the year progresses, that comes through as part of the quarterly monitoring. So we're really transparent and open in all of the changes that we make to the plan, seeking to ensure that we're all focused on delivering the priorities that we've agreed as a council through that overarching plan.
I'd appreciate a sight of that track changes if you don't mind. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you, sir. Okay, that takes us on to item 16, where we need to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items. And the resolution is that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Is that agreed? In that case, we can end